I was working the night shift at the store, not expecting anything unusual. Typically, there weren't many people around at night, just a few customers picking out alcohol or groceries for a late dinner. All my colleagues were at home, and I usually spent my time playing Clash Royale, occasionally taking calls or checking the shelves. That evening, there were slightly more people than usual, but nothing alarming. I noticed a man, around 42 years old, standing by the children's section. He didn't look like most customers, dressed in dark, somewhat worn clothes, with a focused gaze fixed on the toys. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him, but as he stood there for several minutes, I began to feel uneasy. He didn't move, just stared at the shelves of toys, but something about his behavior seemed off. I thought he might be choosing a gift for a child, but there was something in his eyes, too cold for that made me stop and think. I decided to return to my game but glanced at him again. This time, he turned to me, as if sensing my gaze. Our eyes met, and I saw something in his eyes that was impossible to describe. It wasn't just emptiness, it was something so dark and terrifying that it became hard to breathe. I tried to go back to my game, but my eyes kept involuntarily drifting back to him. The man spent a few more minutes slowly browsing the shelves of toys. His movements seemed mechanical, unhurried but lacking genuine interest. Finally, he picked up several boxes, around 7 or 9, and headed to the checkout. As he came closer, I got a better look at his face. It was tired, as if he hadn't slept in many nights, but that wasn't what unsettled me. His gaze was empty, and the smile he tried to force looked more like a grimace. Without saying a word, he placed the toys on the counter, paid in cash, and, without waiting for his change, quickly gathered his purchases and walked out of the store. I watched him through the glass doors. He approached his car, an old black sedan with noticeable scratches along the side. Something about this man didn't sit right with me. He didn't look like a father buying gifts for his kids. I had a strange, almost paranoid feeling that those toys weren't meant for children at all. I decided to take a picture of his license plate. Pulling out my phone, I snapped a photo and immediately saved it to my gallery. The sense of unease grew stronger, and I couldn't ignore the voice in my head any longer. A few minutes later, I dialed 911. The operator answered in a calm voice, asking what had happened. I quickly described the situation. There's a man who just bought a lot of children's toys at our store, but his behavior was really strange. I took a picture of his car's license plate because I have a feeling something isn't right. The operator asked for more details, the description of the car, the men, and the toys he purchased. I answered all the questions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this might seem trivial. Maybe it was just my imagination. Then the operator said, "Please hold on. We're checking the license plate." My hands were sweaty as I waited. Finally, the operator returned, but her tone had grown more serious. "Thank you for your call. Can you remain at the store? A police patrol is on its way to you. Under no circumstances should you attempt to interact with this man if he comes back." Her words sent chills down my spine. What had they found? Who was this man? A few minutes later, a police car pulled up in front of the store. 2 officers walked in, their faces serious. One of them approached me. "Are you the one who called?" I nodded, trying to stay calm, though my heart was pounding wildly. I showed them the photo of the car's license plate, and they immediately relayed the information over the radio. The second officer asked, "Are you sure his behavior seemed suspicious?" "Yes," I replied, making an effort not to leave out any details. He was choosing the toys in such a strange way, completely emotionless. And when he came to the register, his look. There was something very wrong about it. The officers exchanged a glance. Finally, one of them said, "You may have saved lives. This man has been on the run for 2 years, wanted for child abductions. He's suspected of several crimes, but we haven't been able to locate him until now." I felt the ground shift beneath me. What had started as an ordinary night shift was turning into a real nightmare. "What should we do now?" I asked, barely managing to hold my phone steady. "We've already called for backup," the senior officer replied. "His car is being tracked, but we need any additional details you can provide." "Did you see what he purchased?" I quickly recalled: toys, cars, dolls, some educational kits. But he picked them up like they were just objects, like they didn't matter at all. The officers exchanged another look. These people rarely act without a purpose. "He may be planning something soon. Your call could help us stop him in time." While they spoke, I noticed that one of the store cameras was pointed directly at the checkout where he had made his purchase. "We have security footage," I said, pointing to the monitor. One of the officers requested access to the recordings. We quickly reviewed the footage. It clearly showed him placing the toys on the conveyor belt, paying for them, and then leaving. The camera had also captured a close-up of his face. "That's him," one of the officers confirmed, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He even has the same items we found at previous crime scenes." My hands trembled as I watched. I could only observe as the officers coordinated a search operation. Through their radio, they were informed that the car had been spotted at a nearby gas station. "We need to move." "Stay here," one of them said before heading out. I was left alone, and the silence in the store became unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about what that man had done and why he needed those toys. The next morning, I woke up at home, feeling a lingering unease after the events of the night shift. I wanted to believe the police had managed to catch the men, but doubts kept gnawing at me. I turned on the TV to distract myself and immediately stumbled upon the morning news. The screen displayed a familiar face, the same man with the cold stare. Below his photo, the headline read in bold letters: "Suspect in child abductions apprehended last night." My heart raced as I saw his car, the same scratched black vehicle he had driven away from the store. The news anchor reported: "Last night, police apprehended a man wanted in connection with multiple child abductions over the past 2 years. He was located at a gas station thanks to the swift actions of law enforcement and the testimony of an eyewitness." Eyewitness. I swallowed hard. That was my information, my call. The anchor continued: "During a search of his vehicle, police discovered several children's toys and items that may link him to other crimes. The man is currently in custody as the investigation continues." The screen switched to another reporter standing outside the police station. He confirmed that the man was indeed the suspect police had been searching for over 2 years. It turned out he had previously been detained under suspicion but was released due to a lack of evidence. This time, as they reported, there was sufficient proof. I sat on the couch, staring at the screen. A wave of mixed emotions washed over me, relief that this time things turned out for the better, and horror at realizing how close danger had come to me. My phone rang, and I answered it. It was one of the officers who had come to the store that night. "Good morning, this is Officer Reynolds. We wanted to thank you for your help. Your call played a crucial role in apprehending this man." What happened to him?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "We've arrested him. He's in custody now, and the investigation is ongoing. But I want you to know, you did the right thing. Because of you, we may have prevented another crime." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in a long while, I felt genuine relief. It had been just another night shift, but it had changed far more than I could have ever imagined. The gas station sat alone on the edge of a quiet highway, a flickering neon sign its only companion in the suffocating darkness. It was the kind of place people only stopped at when they had no other choice, midway between nowhere and somewhere. The night shift was always slow, but tonight felt unnervingly still. Even the crickets seemed to have gone silent. I glanced at the clock, 2:37 a.m. 2 more hours until my shift ended, and I could finally leave this lonely outpost. The smell of stale coffee wafted from the counter, where a pot had been brewing for hours. I was staring blankly at the security monitors, trying to stay awake, when the headlights of an approaching car sliced through the night. A black sedan pulled up to pump number 3. Its paint gleamed, almost unnaturally clean for a car traveling these back roads. I straightened in my chair, the sudden movement shaking off my drowsiness. A man stepped out, his silhouette illuminated briefly by the gas station's buzzing fluorescent lights. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to absorb the light. He moved with purpose, yet there was something off about his demeanor, too deliberate, as if every step was calculated. The man didn't start pumping gas right away. Instead, he stood by the car, his head slowly turning toward the station. I felt his gaze pierce through the glass and settle on me. I swallowed hard, trying to look busy. Grabbing the nearest clipboard, I pretended to check stock levels. When I dared to glance up again, he was gone. I leaned forward to look at the security monitor. He was at the pump, inserting his card. Relieved, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But as I watched, I noticed something strange. He wasn't filling his tank. He was just standing there, holding the nozzle, staring at the ground. Then, as if sensing my eyes on him, he turned his head sharply toward the camera. I froze. He was staring directly into the lens, his face obscured by shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as his hand slowly raised and pointed at the station. At me. I jumped when the door chime rang. He had entered the station. "Evening," he said, his voice smooth but unsettlingly cold. Evening," I replied, forcing a smile. "Can I help you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around the store, his heavy boots thudding against the tiled floor. He didn't look at the snacks or drinks, his attention was elsewhere. His head turned toward the back hallway, where the staff restroom and storage room were located. "Quiet night?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah, pretty slow," I said, trying to sound casual. He nodded, then picked up a bottle of water from the cooler. As he approached the counter, I noticed his hands, large, rough, and stained with something dark, like oil or grease. "That all for you?" I asked, ringing up the water. "For now," he said, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. "For now," I repeated, but he didn't elaborate. He took the bottle and walked back outside, leaving the $20 on the counter without waiting for his change. I watched him on the monitors as he returned to his car. He stood outside it for a moment, looking toward the woods behind the station. Then he got into the driver's seat and drove off, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. I tried to shake off the encounter, but something about the men lingered in my mind. Why had he pointed at the station? What had he been looking at in the back hallway? The minutes dragged on, and the unease grew. I decided to distract myself by checking the storage room inventory. Grabbing the clipboard, I headed down the dimly lit hallway. The air felt colder back there, and the faint hum of the freezers was the only sound. As I opened the storage room door, the smell hit me, metallic and sour. My stomach turned as I flicked on the light. On the floor, smeared across the tiles, were dark streaks of what looked like blood. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back. The streaks led toward the far corner of the room, where a stack of boxes sat precariously. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone, dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency? There's something in the storage room at the gas station. Blood on the floor. I don't know what's going on, I stammered. Stay on the line. Officers are en route, the operator said firmly. I backed out of the room, keeping my eyes on the corner. As I stepped into the hallway, the door to the restroom creaked open. I hadn't touched it. The door swung wider, revealing nothing but darkness. My heart raced as I inched toward it, phone still pressed to my ear. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. Suddenly, a faint noise came from the restroom, a low, dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor. I bolted back to the front desk, locking the door to the hallway behind me. The security monitor showed nothing unusual, just the empty parking lot and the rain-soaked pumps. But then, on one of the feeds, I saw movement. The man in the dark coat was back, standing at the edge of the woods. This time, he wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the shadows, their forms indistinct but unmistakably human. They stood there, motionless, staring at the station. The phone slipped from my hand as I realized they were all pointing at me. The faint sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, but I wasn't sure if they'd arrive in time. Something told me this wasn't over. The sirens grew louder, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were too far away to matter. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stared at the figures on the screen, unmoving but impossibly menacing. The man in the dark coat stepped forward first, his deliberate movements sending a cold wave of dread through me. The other two followed, emerging fully into the dim glow of the gas station's floodlights. I grabbed the bat we kept under the counter, not that I thought it would help much. My trembling hands barely held it steady. The figures approached the front door slowly, their faces still obscured by shadows. I instinctively reached for the lock, double-checking that it was secure. The thick glass of the station's doors felt like the only thing separating me from whatever this was. And then, they stopped. All three stood perfectly still, just a few feet from the entrance. The man in the coat tilted his head slightly, as if examining me through the glass. I backed away, my breathing shallow. On the security monitor, the parking lot was still empty, no sign of police lights yet. The man lifted a hand and knocked once on the door. The sound echoed through the silent station, each knock louder than it should have been. "Who are you?" I managed to shout, though my voice cracked halfway through. The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and shiny. He held it up to the glass, letting the light catch it, a key. What could it unlock? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. And then I realized something chilling. That key didn't belong to my station. It wasn't for any lock here. It was my apartment key. Panic surged through me as I instinctively checked my pockets. My key ring was gone. It must have fallen out somewhere, but how did he get it? When? The man smiled, just a slight curl of his lips, but it made my skin crawl. I backed farther into the store, fumbling for my phone again. The operator's voice was still faintly audible on the line, calling my name. "Hello. Are you still there? Officers are almost on scene." Almost wasn't good enough. The man placed the key back into his pocket, then reached up to the collar of his coat. With deliberate slowness, he pulled something out and held it against the glass, a photograph. It was of me. I stumbled backward, the bat clattering to the floor. The image was unmistakable, me standing behind this very counter, taken from an angle that wasn't captured by any of the store's cameras. I scrambled to the back hallway, locking myself inside the storage room. My hands trembled as I barricaded the door with whatever I could find, boxes, shelving, anything heavy enough to slow them down. Through the thin walls, I could hear the faint sound of the front door handle rattling. They were trying to get in. The sirens were closer now. The red and blue lights began to flicker through the narrow storage room window, but I wasn't sure if I could trust my relief just yet. A loud crash reverberated through the station. The front door. No, the sound was closer, coming from inside the building. The hallway. They had found another way in. Desperation took over. I searched the room for anything useful, a weapon, an exit, anything. My eyes landed on a vent near the floor. It wasn't big, but maybe it was my only way out. I dropped to my knees, prying at the screws with shaking hands. Behind me, the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. "Come out," a voice called. It was the man in the coat, his tone calm but laced with something that felt like a threat. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, right." The vent cover finally gave way, and I crawled inside, dragging myself through the narrow space. The cold metal scraped against my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. The footsteps reached the storage room door. Bang. The first hit shook the door, but it held. Bang. The barricade wouldn't last much longer. I crawled faster, the sirens now deafening. They had to be outside by now, but could they even see what was happening? A third bang, and the door gave way. I didn't look back, didn't dare. The sound of heavy boots entered the room as I reached the end of the vent. With one final push, I burst out onto the gravel behind the station. The night air was freezing, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the parking lot, waving frantically at the 2 squad cars pulling in. "Help! They're inside!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. The officers jumped out, guns drawn. "Stay here," one of them barked as they entered the station. I stood there, panting, watching the building as the lights inside flickered erratically. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Finally, one of the officers emerged, shaking his head. "There's no one in there," he said. "What?" I stammered. "That's not possible, they were just here." The officer frowned. "We checked every room. No sign of anyone." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Check the cameras," I insisted. He nodded and went back inside while I stayed outside with the second officer. The cold gravel bit into my palms as I leaned against the ground, trying to steady myself. When the officer returned, his face was pale. "The cameras," he began, his voice trailing off. "What about them?" I pressed. "They don't show anything. No car, no men, nothing. Just you." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's impossible. I saw them." "You saw the broken door." "But when we looked at the entrance, the door was intact. No signs of a break-in, no damage at all. And in my pocket, where there should have been nothing, I felt a cold metallic object. My apartment key. I didn't take it out. I didn't want to know if it was still my key, or something else entirely. For the first time in my life, I wondered if going home was the worst thing I could do. I stood frozen in place, my hand gripping the key in my pocket like a lifeline, but I didn't dare look at it. My heart raced as the reality of what had just happened began to set in. The officers seemed as confused as I was, their puzzled expressions a mirror of my own disbelief. But I could see the doubt in their eyes, doubt that wasn't there before. "Are you sure you're okay?" the second officer asked, his voice quieter now, almost as if he wasn't sure whether he was talking to me or himself. I nodded, still not trusting my own voice. "We're going to take a look at the security footage again," the first officer said, his tone serious. He didn't look at me, his gaze locked on the gas station door. "You should stay here. It's not safe inside right now." But I couldn't stay. I couldn't just wait around while those men, those strangers, might still be out there, watching me. I had to know what was going on. I made a decision then, one that I didn't entirely understand, but the urgency in my veins was overwhelming. "I'll go in with you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The officers exchanged a glance, and the first officer sighed, his hand resting on his holster. "It's not safe. We don't know what we're dealing with here. But if you insist." I didn't give him the chance to finish. I stepped forward, heading toward the door with the officers behind me. The gas station, once a place of routine, now felt like a foreign land, dark, unsettling, and utterly alien. The air felt thick with something I couldn't explain. We entered cautiously, the officers' flashlights cutting through the darkness. The interior was eerily quiet, the usual hum of the refrigerators and the flicker of the neon lights absent. But there was something. Something wrong. As we moved deeper into the station, the first officer turned to me. "You're sure you saw them?" I nodded, pointing to the counter. They were right there. In front of the glass door. The second officer checked the back rooms, and the first officer approached the counter, examining the monitors. "Nothing," he muttered. "No footage. It's all gone." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What do you mean, it's gone?" I demanded, stepping closer. "They erased it." He turned to face me, his expression grave. Whoever they were, they knew exactly what they were doing. I glanced at the spot where the security camera used to be, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. But then I noticed something else. On the counter, partially hidden beneath a pile of receipts, was the same photograph. It was of me again. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just a photo from the security cameras. It was a close-up of me, taken in my own apartment, while I was asleep. I froze, staring at it. I had no memory of the photo being taken. No memory of the camera ever being in my apartment. "What is this?" I whispered. The officers looked at each other, their faces pale. One of them took the photo in his hand, inspecting it. "This doesn't make sense," the second officer said. "It's almost like they're toying with you. Playing some kind of game." A loud crash interrupted us, echoing from the back of the store. We all spun around, weapons drawn, but no one was there. "Stay close," the first officer ordered, his voice low but commanding. He motioned for me to follow him. We moved toward the back, the darkness enveloping us as we passed the aisles of snacks and drinks. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified, every breath loud in the stillness. We reached the back hallway, where the emergency exit door swung open. A cold gust of wind blew through, sending a shiver down my spine. But there was something even more unsettling. On the ground near the exit door, a piece of paper lay crumpled and torn. The officer bent down to pick it up. It was a note. "I'm closer than you think." The words were written in a jagged, hurried scrawl. The handwriting was unmistakable, it was mine. I stepped back, my mind racing. No. No, that's not possible. But as I looked at the officers, I saw they were just as shaken as I was. "This isn't just a prank," the first officer said quietly. "This is something else. Something much worse." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What do we do now?" The officer looked toward the back exit, where the faint sounds of footsteps echoed from the alley. "We find out who's behind this. And we don't stop until we do." We stepped outside into the cold night air, but the fear still lingered. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. The gas station, my workplace, was no longer a safe place. It was a trap, a place where someone or something was playing a deadly game. And I was the pawn. I couldn't go home, not yet. I couldn't risk it. The men in the coat, the photo, the note, all of it had pushed me to the edge. But I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to let whoever was behind this get away. But where would I go? What would I do? And how could I escape if the people hunting me knew exactly where I was at all times? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't face this alone. The night was far from over.